أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So let us get started with the questions, and the questions are: how are you? How has your week been so far? Did anything new or atypical take place? If so, how did you navigate it? How do you deal with new things? How do we deal with new things we come across every day or whenever we come across them? And how do we learn more about them when no one seems to know much about them, and we have to investigate by ourselves? As in, new things happen or unique things happen that haven't happened before or you don't know about. How do we navigate that when we approach other people and we're not able to get help from them and so on? So what do we do? How do we navigate that? So the question is, again, this is a continuation of the previous thing that we did, and I just added a few more questions. How do we find out how things work or what they are made of? How do we know? As in, how do we know things? This is a riddle. Okay? So think about this. Think about, how do we know things? How do we know anything? How do we learn? How do we acquire information, knowledge, and things like that? Just at the very, very basic level, how do human beings learn and know things? How did it all start years and years and centuries ago, right? That's what I want you guys to start thinking about, because this is sort of how we think, and this is how we build on previous information and so on. So this is pretty much what I'm trying to get at over here. But I want this to be a thing where it's really like deep, as in it really gets you to think about stuff that we took for granted, right? There is a science called epistemology, and the idea is that it explores how information is acquired, what is knowledge, and things like that, right? This is sort of what we're kind of covering over here. And I'm going to do this today by way of examples and just kind of, doing some activities here and there. So yeah, study of knowledge, more or less. So the idea is pretty much like to give you guys an introduction to this topic, so you guys have an idea of why certain rules that we have in our rubrics might be faulty, and how do we account for those things, and how can we become flexible in terms of in the context of neuroplasticity and just in general learning and growing and things like that. So we don't have rules in our head that are unrealistic or whatever. How do we figure out capital T truths? How do we learn about them and then build our rubrics from scratch based on those capital T truths only and not anything else, right? That's what I want us to start thinking about. So I know we kind of like, it seems like it might seem like we are not really covering these things, but we are covering these things, because a lot of these things right here, in terms of how we do things, what motivates us, for example, what steps that we should take, those are things that we want, like things that we need to understand the root, like, or the causes behind, or like pretty much the underlying factors that impact this stuff. So that's what we're doing over here. All right, and then again, remember these things. A lot of the problems that happen when people are not able to sustain goals, or they get overwhelmed, or they get burnt out, are some of these things over here. So just keep that in mind as well. Now, the next thing is brain games. Okay, but wait, we have to do mysteries first. So mystery number 1. What is going on here? How in the world would you figure out? How would you figure out what's going on over here? Maybe this is all scripted, and this is in a movie theater, or not a movie theater, like a one of those places where they're going to be filming it. It's like on a set. Maybe it's like that. Or maybe this is real life. Maybe you actually came across this situation. Or maybe you know, that person is you, and you guys are just kind of like, you and your friend are just kind of doing something like, I don't know, pranking somebody. Or maybe this is something where you're actually, you know, trying to figure out what this guy is doing here. Maybe this is not a human being. Maybe this is just like a scarecrow or something like that. Maybe there's so many different possibilities, right? But I want you to start thinking about, and if you guys can list in the chat, or, you know, just kind of mention out loud some of the possibilities of what could this be, then we can continue each other. So just possibilities of what could be happening over here. You come across something, a new something. Remember this, the question that I asked in the very beginning. This question right here. How do we learn more about something new, right? You come across something new. How do you come across that? I mean, how do you navigate that? How do you move forward? So this is that something new. What are some things that, like, how would you navigate this? What could this be happening? What could be happening here? What are the different possibilities? So someone at a crossroads in life. Okay, so this could be like a metaphorical thing. Okay, yeah, maybe this is just a metaphor in visual form, right? Okay, what else could it be? List down all the possibilities.
So we're assuming that we come across this in person?
Yeah,
or, yeah. Okay.
Now notice the word that you use, assume, right? That is a very important word because we're going to bring that up a little bit later as well. So there's the thing about light and darkness. Okay, so this is another metaphor. So we're getting into metaphors. And then, okay, flashlight in the woods. Okay. So we're just writing down the possibilities of what this could be. What is this picture possibly representing? Or maybe like this, let's assume that you're actually seeing this happening in front of you, right? Whether it's Muhammad asked if this is like, are we assuming that this is like something that we see in real life? Or is it like a, you know, a picture that you see at the museum or something like that, the art museum or something like that, right? So just what are the possibilities over here? Actually, Muhammad, don't even assume anything, just could be anything. It could be at a museum that this is just art. It could be real life that this is something happening and stuff. It could be a metaphor. It could be any of those things. But just write down all the possibilities. Light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, someone about to be hit by a train. Okay, stranger things. Okay. So, like, you can write down all the possibilities, whether they could be realistic things or they could be things that are not realistic. Now, focus also. Okay, there's depression. Okay, someone at the edge of a cliff. Okay. Or like, you can also mention which direction the person is facing. Are they facing us or are they facing the other way? What are all the possibilities of what this could be? So he's looking straight, but which direction? Is it, first of all, is it a he or a she? A lost person in the woods. I think they're either facing away from the light or directly at it. Yeah, so okay, two things. A person could be lost. It could be a person who knows what they're doing. It could be a person sort of halfway lost. It could be that they're facing us or they're facing the light. It could be that they actually have, guess what? They have a headlamp, and that's what's bringing the light out. As in, there's no light coming at them. They're actually projecting the light from the headlamp that they have, like in camping, for example. There's also that possibilities, right? Guided by the light, trying to stay within the light on both sides. Okay. He could be in a dark phase of his life, leaving the phase in the right, going to the left, or vice versa. Okay. So a transition, like between the two, right? Okay. Someone cave exploring. Okay, if assuming that there like are trees and caves and stuff, yeah, that could happen. Or maybe those things on the side are actually just, you know, curtains. Okay, this could be a screenshot from a movie, Vampire Vision. Okay, so maybe maybe this is actually a bed pillow, for example, cover. You can have, for example, this could be like, you know, curtains that are on the side of something, and that's what you're seeing on the side. Maybe this is just a design and it's not real. Could be that as well. Low pixel quality, by the way, could be 90s clip or a JPEG photo. Okay, yeah. So it could be like a picture. It could be like from the past. It could be current. It could be in the future. It could be. So, okay, what else? The right side is more orange. Maybe it's a firefighter near a forest fire. Ooh, okay, yeah, that could be true. Maybe he's trying to figure out like, okay, what to do and stuff. Okay. Maybe he's okay, the right side is more orange. Yeah, so maybe there's a fire on the right side, and maybe he's just trying to navigate that. Maybe this is a picture with 3D glasses on top to explain the red and blue. Okay, yeah, this could be like there's a red and blue filters. Okay, could be that. Okay, what about in real life? Assume that this is real life. Now we're going to do an assumption here, right? So we're going to narrow down. When we do an assumption, we narrow down the possibilities. So instead of looking at the millions, billions, or quadrillions of possibilities, we're narrowing it down to whatever the assumption narrows this down to, whatever the assumption bounds us right to, right? So in this case, we're going to assume that this is real life, that this is not fake. So this is an actual person, and that's that. So they're actually in a forest. So every time I say something, I'm actually giving more assumptions, and those assumptions are going to narrow down the number of possibilities, but still see how many possibilities stay nonetheless. So somewhere in winter, okay. So think of it like now as real life. Like this is in real life. This is the person in the woods, and this person is like, that's what you see over here. Like you're actually there with him, and or her, and you don't see, like, you're not. There's no barrier. There's no like picture. This is real. This is in front of you. The person could be under a bridge, which is why we see that central shadow. Okay, this could be that the person is under a bridge. So maybe like there's a bridge here, although there's trees over here. Maybe though, like there might be a bridge like across over there. Maybe this is a bridge itself, for example, that the person is walking across, and there's trees on both sides, but there's like a bridge that connects this riverbank to the other riverbank, and that could be water on both sides. Okay. There's police on the top, firefighters on the right, on the left. Okay, yeah. So there could be like police sirens over here, and there's firefighters, over here, for example. Yeah, that could happen. That could be true. Now, as you continue, like, writing stuff here, I want you to start thinking about how we explore new things in life, how scientists or others, how they actually explore things. So let's say they come across something, and then they have to figure out all the things. Now, like, I didn't ask you yet. Okay, so there's another one. It's dawn time, explain the mist, sun is rising on the right, night leaving on the left. Or it could be the exact opposite too, yeah. He's wearing long sleeves, okay. Or maybe he's wearing a jacket, right? It could. So the other questions is, okay, well, how did he get here in the first place? What was he doing right before that? And where is he going to, right? So this is the past and future scenario that we can also explore, that we haven't yet explored because we're just so fixated on the present, right? So the past could be like, okay, well, how did he get here? Who is he and stuff? Where was his name? What are his parents looking like? What is his context? What is his history? We could also explore that. Now notice that we're doing this with one very specific image, one very specific thing over here, right? We can also start looking at, for example, what kind of trees that are there, for example, right? We can also see, for example, how did the trees come from, right? Or where did the trees come from? We could talk about if he's walking on a path, is it dirt path, or is it like an actual wooden bridge or something like that? Who built that bridge and stuff? Where did that come from? How old are these trees around him and stuff like that? We can ask so many things, right? Maybe it's not that it's winter season, and that's why the trees don't have leaves. Maybe they just there was some like burning that happened and stuff, and so they all the leaves fell off and stuff, but the trees are still there, for example, right? That could happen too. So there's so many different possibilities of the origin of the current situation of the future and stuff, and that's what I want you to start thinking about, like how many possibilities with just something so tiny right here, right? About everything that's involved, every little increment of thing over here, everything that's part of this, that's all that is important. It could be that the water is around it, maybe there's ice around it, maybe it's not water and stuff, it's just frozen. It could be so many different things. How did the water freeze? How did the water even get there and stuff like that? Is it a dam, or is it like a lake or whatever? All those things. He could be lost and a rescue team found him, and that's the rescue. Yeah, there's so many different possibilities, right? So think about this as we look at this picture here. Now, is this a real picture, or do you think that this is like a fake picture? Have you ever seen a cow look like this? Now, let's say that you come across a cow like this, or a picture like this. What would you do? Definitely real? Okay. Well, maybe this is going to help a little bit right here. There's a bull almost on steroids. Bull steroids. Is this a real cow, or is it just doctored up? Like maybe it's like a picture of, like it's a Photoshop picture, for example. How would you know? What would you do? How would you figure out how it got to be like this, if it's real or not? What are the things that you would do to even figure out all the details about this cow? So it looks unreal, but could be real. Okay, how would you know? How would you figure out? How would you figure out how it even look like this and stuff, as opposed to all the other cows that don't look like this, right? Maybe it was like hitting the gym or something like that a lot, and that's why it got buffed up right here, right? Or maybe it just took steroids or something like that. Could be that.
Well, this picture looks more real than the last one did, just because this one does not look real. This one looks very poorly edited. For one, the lines around the body of the animal is more crispier compared to the previous photo, so this one looks more real for that reason. And then for another, that sky in the previous photo is so photoshopped and looks absolutely fake. So either that or someone put that contrast level way too high and the exposure is way too high, but it doesn't match what's on the cow. If it's a cow, I still don't think it looks like a cow. But on the second photo, if you notice, the top of the photo has more light, which makes sense because if it's outside, then more light should be casting on top, and it is on the body of the cow as well as the sky. But then on the bottom, the entire bottom half of the animal is shadowed, which makes sense because the sun wouldn't get across to that part. And then it's standing in a pretty muddy area, which also makes sense because the hooves are also dirty, which you can see too. And then even on the neck of the animal, the shadow from the chin is cast there too. So this one looks like it was actually, like it actually looks like it, this looks more real than the previous photo did, but I also think this one could be edited. Previous photo really just doesn't look real to me. And if
But if it's a pretty picture? What if it's just like a low quality picture and that's why it looks all fake? But it's actually a real picture, but it's just low quality. And so when they increased the size, then it became actually like very grainy looking and stuff. So let me adjust.
That's possible, but if you see the quality of the picture in the back looks different than the front. So like it could even be.
How about now?
It still looks fake to me, I think.
Did you see the hand in the corner?
Yeah.
So this is a real picture. It's just like really low quality. This is also a real picture. So the next question now I want you to think about, there was an answer in the thing saying test for steroids to see if the cow is statin deficient. Okay, so this cow right here, assume that this is a real cow. Okay, now how would you explore this? Like, what would you're looking at this cow now, there are so many questions that are just coming into your head. Okay, is this how did it get to be? Is this like a rare breed or something like that? Is it like something that's like like genetic mutation or something like that? Is it like this is just a really common thing and stuff? Or like, what is going on with this cow and stuff? Is it only males like this, or also females? Is it like something that happens to like the adults in this thing in this breed? Or is it only like like the young ones that get this? Or maybe it's like a particular subgroup of the adults that have this or whatever? Or what is happening over here? Like, there's so many different questions. Do they only come in with this color or a different color? All these questions are there that you're just kind of like that are running through your head. Now, how do you actually explore these? How do you actually navigate? How do you actually figure out the answers to these things and stuff, right? How was this born? Was it born like this and stuff, or did it actually have these muscles later on, right? And when it was born and stuff, was there like an emergency surgery that needed to be done for this cow, or is it just like these breeds are just like this, and so this is how they come out or whatever, right? How did it start? What was the first cow that looked like this and stuff? In the history of like cows and stuff, for example, right? All these questions are things that if scientists look at this, or anybody, altogether human beings, the set of questions that people might ask altogether, if you took all the people in the world and they saw this cow, right? All the people, all their questions that might come up, if you put them together, these are some of the kind of questions that they might ask. And so they would have to figure out how to get the answers to them, right? So there's a process. Among them, it could be, for example, they might go to a person who's a cow expert, or they might go to, for example, into a superstition, or they might look into intuition, for example. And we're going to talk about some of these things a little bit, inshallah. But I just want you to kind of start seeing that the kinds of questions that anybody would ask related to when they see something like this, let alone if they see other things that, for example, this fence right here. I don't know if you guys noticed the fence, right? But how did the fence come up? What is it made out of, for example, right? This post right here. What is that made out of? Why is it looking brown? Is it rusted, or is it just painted like this and stuff, right? What is all of this stuff right here? This thing right here, the muddy stuff, is it ending over here, right there, or does it keep going? And because of what they call perspective in art, right, that's why it looks like it's like kind of like, you know, ending over here, it's merging over here, but in reality it's just looking like that because of the fact that we're looking at it from far away and stuff, right? And it's kind of like merging like that, it seems to be. So there's so many different things you can look at now. Is this a ground, for example? Is this a road, or is it something else, right? Is it like, you know, a dirt road, or is it like an actual, like, for example, paved road over here? What is this, right? These are the questions. These are some of the questions that people might ask, and then they actually would try to find ways to actually get the answers. So they would set up hypotheses. I think that this is what it is, and then because I think this is what it is, let me come up with a methodology to be able to test that particular how or what that I'm exploring with this hypothesis. So my methodology would have to conform to whatever I'm assuming to be part of this thing, right? So keep that in mind, okay? Now let me show you this video right here. It's a short video, but
he's around about the
that's a ginormous cow right here, right? Look at the size over here. And these, what I showed you, is called a Belgian Blue Cow. This thing right here is called a Belgian Blue Cow. It's a specific breed. You can look it up. Belgian Blue Cow. And some of them are going to have a blue tint to them. But these are just, this is how they are. There's nothing like, you know, especially fed them, and so there's nothing injected in them and stuff. This is how the cow looks and stuff, right? That's just how the cow is. This is called the Belgian Blue Cow. So look it up, and it is a thing. It's definitely real, even though it might seem like it's not. So let me just close these out. And this is a, you know, a big giant like steer compared to the others and stuff. But you can see like the size difference. So like the Belgian Blue Cow is ginormous, and if you go through, you're gonna like, if you search it up, you're gonna see more of them, inshallah. Now I want to steer up into the next thing, and that is, how do scientists explore things? You know, remember we talked about the word assumptions. So, and I said for assumptions that keep that word in mind, because when you're looking at the world, everything, the entire universe and stuff, right? Let me see if I can open a video of the universe really quick. Not a video, like a picture. Okay. Now, let me show you. Yeah, I said the video, you know, by accident. Okay, so let's look at this right here. So this is a little tiny, like, you know, glimpse of what the universe. If we look into the, you know, deep universe, for example, like, you know, let's say we use a telescope, for example, and we look at what's out there. These are some of the pictures that we're gonna start seeing. Okay, these are some of the things that you're gonna see out there. When I was in high school, I actually took a class on all this stuff right here, and we looked at like how to differentiate between a star versus, for example, those are stars right there. Those things, the way that it gets captured on, you know, on a picture or whatever, is that those things that look like X's, right, or like, you know those like plus signs or X's and stuff. Those are stars. And then you have, like, you know, some galaxies and stuff like that. Like you might have a spiral galaxy here. You might have elliptical galaxies and stuff like that, right? So there's a bunch of these things kind of there. We're in the Milky Way galaxy, and so you can see if there's like a bunch of other galaxies all spread all over here. You can see like how tiny we are compared to everything else and stuff, right? Yes, I was very curious. I wanted to learn many different things, so like I explored many different things, right? So if you look at all these things, let's look at this picture right here. So you can see like it's filled with all these like galaxies, stars, you know, supernovas and stuff, and like all these like, there's so many things out there, right? So here are some like gas clouds here. You can see some of the gas clouds in here, right? These are pretty. Obviously, some of them are rendered, you know, in terms of coloring, but then, like, you know, just the shape and, you know, all that stuff is pretty nice and stuff. So these are actually things that are out there that, you know, the scientists have been able to kind of like take pictures of, snapshots of. Here's another one. You can see that right there, right? Okay, so here's that. Here's what I was talking about. We had these like clouds and stuff, right? So okay, now moving forward, what I want you to start thinking about is this: what are the assumptions of science, and what are they useful for? If I need to figure out how the world came to be, how yeah, how everything came to be, for example, how everything works. If I'm looking at a picture of this universe, for example, and I'm looking at like these things right here, I need to be able to, like, you know, people, they ask questions like, okay, well, how did it come to be? What is it made out of and stuff? And how far is it from us? And these are the kind of things that, for example, astrophysicists are going to look into, for example, right? This is the kind of stuff that they're going to kind of explore and kind of figure out the answers to. How do we find out how far that is? Right? The distances are so far away that we're not going to be able to travel in our lifetime, it seems, like, you know, with all this stuff. So the question is, like, how do we actually measure how far that is? How do we measure what it is made out of? Scientists actually have been able to figure out what these things are made out of, right? And there's like a lot of techniques that I don't need to go into right now, inshallah, but like, you know, I hope that, you know, you just take my word for it for now. But anyways, they've been able to figure out what these things are composed of, what kind of elements that are in here and stuff. Like how long have they been here, for example? What could have been like but these are, you know, a lot of these things, because we can't actually physically go there and, you know, like test them out. They've gotten them for, like, you know, from other ways. For example, the way that light came to them, they measured the light, for example, that the way that, you know, like certain elements, or not certain elements, certain particles came to us, and then they tried to, you know, connect the dots and say, okay, well, there's this right here and there's this other thing that we got, and then, okay, how do we put it together to potentially come up with a working possibility of how this is working out, right? How and where it might have came out. So they look at individual pieces that came, and then they try to use them to form a bigger picture, and that's it. Now, new information might come in, new data points might be, like, you know, might become evident later on, and they're going to try to adjust their theories or hypotheses based on the new information that comes. So if you imagine, like, these are, for example, like, assume that this is the data point that they found right here, this data point right here, and they found this one right here, and they found this one right here. Now, these three data points, it might make a triangle, right? Or it might be that there's other ones that are missing that might make a different shape, like this trapezoid that could be made with these four, this one, this one, this one, and that one, right? It could be a trapezoid. So, but we don't have that fourth piece of information. So right now we might think, okay, well, it's a triangle, it could be other things and stuff. There's so many different possibilities of what it could be. So this is something that the scientists will have to continue exploring and stuff, right? Here's some dots that are being connected over here, but I hope that it's making sense over here, what I'm trying to get at. So when there's so many different possibilities of how and what could be and stuff, then at the end of the day, what happens is this: we have to make assumptions. We have to narrow down the number of possibilities, because if we don't narrow down, we're gonna just, you know, for lack of a better word, go crazy, because it's like a million different things that you could look at and a million different ways that things could work. So you have to start making assumptions, like Muhammad asked for. We make assumptions to narrow down the number of possibilities from which we test out our, you know, like whatever our hypothesis might be. In this context, for example, one of the assumptions that scientists make is that everything has natural causes in the world. Everything has natural causes, you know. For example, that when gravity, you know, when a ball falls is because of gravity, we should be able to explain it, right? And if we don't yet have a data point, like, for example, the world of the jinn and shayateen and stuff like that, if we don't know that, or if we don't believe in angels and stuff, then we're not really going to assume that as, you know, part of how things work. So if something happens when things kind of went like different than what we anticipated because of this assumption, we might have to sort of ignore this for now and say, no, let's try to figure out another natural cause that could have caused this issue to happen, right? And this is very applicable in the context of how things work in general, but also in the context of mental health, for example, right? There are a lot of things that we know of. For example, shaitan, you know, there's waswas, there's whispers in the heart and stuff that comes in, and there's like jinn possession and things like that happen and stuff, right? So this is something that is not yet explainable by natural science, because natural science does not account for these things. They don't believe that this is part of the world yet, right? They don't account for these things yet, especially because, like, how do you actually test out if an angel exists or not, right? How do you actually, like, take a picture of an angel and say, yes, we saw an angel and now we're going to accept this, right? Or we saw a shaitan and stuff like that, and now we actually believe in them or whatever, right? So that's the idea over here. So it becomes very limited, because we're assuming that only natural causes make things happen. Now, generally speaking, yeah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did design a system where things are happening in certain order and certain fixed, you know, amounts and proportions and stuff. But does it mean that this is exactly how every situation is going to look like every single time? Not necessarily. There are going to be exceptions, like that. And we know that the world of the jinn, for example, is alongside of us. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can have, you know, like, do things that, like, change the way things work. For example, how did Qarun get swallowed up by the earth? How did he get swallowed up in the earth and he's falling and stuff, right? How did that happen? How did the moon get split up, as a miracle in the context of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? How did these things happen, right? So this is something that this is not going to be explainable by this assumption. So this assumption narrows down the possibilities, but at the same time, it could be that some of the possibilities that could have been actually capital T truths are also therefore ignored because of this assumption. So this helps us actually simplify the process of figuring out the answers to things. And many times it does work, but then there are going to be times where it doesn't work because we actually assumed that something that was a capital T truth was actually not capital T truth. As in, we assumed that, so we excluded that from the number of possibilities we would consider, right? So if scientists, for example, tell you that, for example, jinn cannot exist, for example, right? If they tell you that, they might be operating with this assumption right here, for example. And if they operate with this assumption, they necessarily preclude or exclude the possibilities of other things interacting and causing things to happen, right? So if you see, for example, Amja had a conference for the Imams conference in 2019, I believe, right? And the Monday session that they had, they were talked about like how jinn possession works, how to do ruqya and things like that. And one of the things that they were mentioning about a case of a girl who actually started levitating and stuff, right? And so now this sounds very scary and stuff, right? But the thing is, like, if you understand that these things are possible and you accept them because, hey, who said they're not possible? Jinn are able to do certain things and stuff like that. So if you see something like that, a person who takes this into account may not actually believe that if they don't include jinn and other things and stuff as part of the natural causes of things, right? So they might actually exclude with this assumption certain capital T truths. And so they become confused when things are not making sense, or they try to find another explanation for something, whereas as Muslims, we allow for other possibilities to be there as well. So in this context, we don't have that issue of overwhelm and frustration. Why is this not making sense and stuff? There has to be another explanation that's natural and stuff and so on, and that's what you're fixated on. So you actually, because you ignore the actual potential possibility by assuming this, therefore, you actually facilitate for yourself actual frustration in the future, because you're gonna no, this is not possible because I'm assuming it's not possible. So therefore, I need to come up with another explanation for this, right? But it has to be natural cause explanation, and natural causes only are allowed to have these particular things within them. So in this case, we might be trying to figure out some natural cause for something, but we might not actually come across that because we've already assumed something was not true, which might actually have been the explanation to whatever we were looking at, right? So I just want you to kind of keep that in mind. Another one is evidence from the natural world. This is, by the way, this is Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, I believe, right? UC Berkeley. Evidence from natural world can be used to learn about those causes. As in, I should be able to measure certain things in the world around me to be able to figure out the causes of those things. So, for example, maybe the girl, for example, I should be able to measure. I don't know. Maybe there was a wind current that came underneath her and stuff, and that made her levitate, for example. And it was so strong because there was a blower, and those things where you have those tunnels that people go to, and they mimic the skydiving experience, right? And they have really strong fans and stuff, and you're just kind of hovering and stuff. So they might say, for example, maybe that's what was happening with her and stuff, right? Maybe she was in one of those tunnels and stuff like that and she paid money and she got in and stuff, and now this is what the experience was all about and stuff, right? Maybe it was in her house, for example. I don't know. They could try to find all these different possibilities because they don't want to include this other possibility. So when they make this assumption, they limit themselves to only those to the evidence that might be derived from those from those sources and stuff like that, right? That's another thing. These things also assume then that external interference, meaning if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to change the way something worked, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told these, for example, the moon to split, for example, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the sea to separate, like in the case of Musa alayhi salam escaping from Fir'aun, Musa alayhi salam and his people escaping from Fir'aun. So something like this would actually probably not be taken into consideration if we account for angels and other things that cause it to happen. How do you have the ocean separate like this, and it makes like two sort of walls and stuff like that, between which Musa alayhi salam and his people cross through, so between which that they like the path that is sort of created, the Musa alayhi salam and his people use that to cross through. How do we explain that? Well, in this case, that's going to be something that they were not going to believe in this if we make these assumptions, right? So we're narrowing down the number of possibilities to make it easier for us to investigate. So we're not like, pulling from a million possibilities. We're only narrowing it down to maybe like, 100 different possibilities, right? So we can check off from, each one. Okay, I tried possibility number one and it didn't work, right? It didn't make things work out in my, whatever I was looking at, it didn't make sense. Something was missing and stuff. This didn't explain what was happening. Like the picture of that person we saw in the woods, right? Like something didn't, like one explanation, one possibility that we explored, it didn't answer all the questions associated with that, right? Maybe let's try possibility number two. So we tried that and so on. Now we've exhausted possibly like all 100 possibilities, and then we came up with, let's say, possibility number 77 was the one that was the most like possible, because it explained most of the questions that we had, right? It made sense. But there were still some holes and stuff. So we said, okay, well, let's explore maybe like a 101st possibility. Maybe it's like, let's go a little bit beyond this. Maybe look at like some of the things that we assumed were not possible. Let's start looking at that. But by the time you get to that point where you actually tested all the possibilities and explored them and tried to make them work and everything and stuff, that might be like decades or centuries and stuff that might pass in the middle, right? And so because of these assumptions, we can actually harm to an extent, certain people and like certain groups of people, certain, maybe even like, for example, animals and like, the environment and so on. So when we make assumptions, we're actually narrowing down, we're actually potentially removing the possibilities that are capital T truth possibilities. That would actually be the explanation of why this is happening, right? So keep this in mind. But when we do this, we are actually making our rubric limited. And so when things happen that our assumptions, the possibilities that were based on our assumptions do not explain, then we get overwhelmed and frustrated, and we can actually develop the condition of learned helplessness. I tried and stuff, nothing made sense so far and stuff, it's not working. I have a case, for example, where a person thinks that they have jinn possession and all these things and stuff, and they might be, it might be like that because the person does seem to be reacting a certain way, but they're actually outsourcing all of their problems to that specific thing. Everything is about jinn, like jinn, and somebody is out to get them, somebody's doing magic against them, and that's it, right? But I spoke to this person and I explained to them, like it's possible that there is something like this, but it doesn't mean that this is the only thing that's impacting you guys over here. There's other things, like there's family dysfunction. That's I see that in there, in this context as well. I see that the person, tried and they didn't learn certain things the right way, and so they assumed that whatever they were learning was the right way, was the right thing and stuff, and so they missed out on a bunch of information that they don't know and they didn't know, and so because of this, now they think that like everything that they tried wasn't working. Maybe the issue was that you didn't try something that you didn't know because you didn't know that thing existed. That way of doing things existed. You didn't know. You didn't learn that, or maybe you didn't learn it the right way, and so that's why you made a mistake when you did it, and that's why things didn't work out, right? So there's more than just like the jinn possibility, the magic possibility. In this case, it seems like a mixture of like jinn plus other things and stuff, right? It's not just jinn. But this person is so adamant, no, it has to be this because I tried, other things. So, well, did you try every other possibility? Or did you only try the possibilities that you assumed were the only possible possibilities, right? Because you narrowed it down by saying, like, okay, I'm assuming this and this and this, and based on this, I'm only going to pull from this limited pool of possibilities. And so I tried those things, right? But if I say, wait, but this assumption that you made, or this other assumption that you made to narrow down, maybe these assumptions were not actually valid, or maybe we need to expand that list a little bit and say, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't assume this thing, right? Maybe you should say, well, let me learn from somebody else about, for example, time management, or maybe like I need to learn from somebody else, for example, in terms of leadership, development skills, or like program management stuff or whatever. Maybe then I'll actually be able to do what I was failing at currently. Maybe I should learn from a basketball player, like a professional basketball player, before I give up and say, well, basketball isn't just for me, isn't for me, it just isn't for me. I need to come up with something, I need to do something else. Why? Because you went to the, your local gym and you started shooting the basketball and you just couldn't make it and stuff, but you didn't want to learn because you thought, I'm just going to learn by trial and error, right? Whereas if you had just gone to like a professional or like a coach or something like that, they would have guided you through the process and you could have become a great basketball player, right? So these are the things that I'm trying to get over here. So this actually precludes or excludes the possibility of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being actively involved in the process of what's happening in our lives and stuff, right? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes something happen, changes the hearts, for example, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing this from outside the universe, right, outside the creation, then what does that mean? It means that, okay, well, we have to account for that as well. But if I assume that everything has to be within the universe itself, within the world around us, within, like, you know, this creation, and nothing from outside is going to intervene, if I assume that, then I'm automatically assuming that Allah doesn't exist, that there is no external reality outside the universe, right? I actually asked one of my professors for one of the classes that I was taking. It was like, you know, there was a series of 3 classes. Well, one of them was astrophysics, another one was galaxies and cosmology, and another one was modern physics and stuff, right? So in this context, I asked, you know, the teacher, I said, you know, so what is outside the universe? Like, what is outside? And he was sort of like, he couldn't, like, he was like, there's nothing outside the universe. It's just everything that exists is the universe. As in, he assumed that outside the universe there's nothing. We believe that the creation is separate from the creator, right? But he said, no, everything that exists is just the creation itself, as in just the universe itself, right? There's nothing outside the universe. So I said, okay, there's Hubble's, you know, the expansion constant, which is like the rate at which the universe is expanding. So I said, okay, so what is it expanding into? What is surrounding it that it's expanding into, right? If it's expanding. I know this is like a very technical question. You know, a lot of, you know, physicists or all these people are gonna, like, you know, like try to poke holes in what I just said. But the question was, like, you know, okay, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we believe, is outside the creation, and he's separate. He's not, like, you know, like, he's not with us here in the world physically and stuff, right? So the question then is, okay, well, then, like, how do we know that if we assume that there is nothing outside the universe, then that's an assumption? Is that a fact? No, not necessarily. It's just an assumption because it makes things a lot easier to manage. As in, it's a lot easier for us to assume that things are not being controlled from outside, being controlled by someone or something that we cannot really, like, you know, measure or explore yet. So it's a lot easier for us to assume that no, there's nothing outside, nothing from outside, everything must be from inside and stuff, right? Yeah, there are some things that are from the inside, like gravity is from, you know, from here, so we can actually measure that. But is that the case in every scenario? That's the thing that, you know, just to think about. Okay, and the last thing over here was, there is consistency in the causes that operate the natural world, as in there is going to be no inconsistency, right? As in, if something strange happens, then, you know, then I have to assume that that was not possible. Maybe there was, you know, something else that needs to be, you know, used to explain it. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intervenes, or there's a miracle, like some of the Sahaba or the people after them and stuff, right? They were actually able to walk across water, right? And that's very strange, but this is one of the miracles that we know of, that they made dua, and, like, they said that as they were crossing, the horses and stuff didn't have the water go, or, you know, as they were crossing the river, the water didn't go up, you know, either, like, you know, above their ankles or above their knees and stuff like that, and that's how they were walking across the river, right? So how did that happen? Well, they're gonna say this is impossible, right? Because this is not, you know, whatever. So in this case, we say no, because we didn't assume that this is actually true in every case. Yeah, it could be that this is the case for most, you know, scenarios and stuff, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can also intervene and give you miracles, mu'jizat and karamat and stuff like that, right? These are, you know, the miracles that can happen. So that's okay. We are open to this possibility. This is why we're believing it. So if anybody says, well, that's impossible, science doesn't work that way, you say, okay, well, that's because you assume that there is consistency in the cause. That's because you assume that, but I'm questioning your assumption. How do you know this assumption is correct, right? So I hope that made sense. Let me go over here really quick. This is from NASA's website, so you can, you guys can go back to this. This is actually going into a little bit of, like, assumptions and, like, scientific models and methods and stuff like that. And one of the things that they talk about is assumptions. So here's the thing that you should probably, like, read really quick. I don't want you to go through all of it yet, but just kind of, like, and I'm not going to go over all of it. I just want you to kind of get an idea of what I was talking about here. So do you make assumptions in your everyday life? If you are like most people, you do. For example, do you assume that there will be additional earthquakes in California? We assume this because this has been a pattern, a trend. We have these data points that we've accumulated and stuff, and we're thinking that this is probably what's going to happen in the future. So we use historical evidence to try to predict what is going to happen in the future. This is what I call the line of best fit. If you remember from previous lessons, the line of best fit. So do you assume that a mountain lion will not attack you on the way to school? Well, yeah, because, if you're living in a place where the, mountain lions are very rare, if they're there at all, then you're probably going to assume that. But if you live in a place where the mountain lions are everywhere, then you're probably going to not think that way instead, right? So when you were 12 years old, did you assume that someday you would have a driver's license? If you probably answered yes to all these questions, you probably do not think, and you do not stop and think about the many subconscious assumptions you make every day, right? Now, this is where the issue happens when it comes to when we get burnt out, when we get stressed out, when we get hurt, when we become like when we like go through like difficulties and pain and depression and stuff. It's because some of the assumptions that we made actually might have actually propagated or manifested themselves into these conditions. If you assumed that you're supposed to, if you let's say that you graduate with a particular degree, that you're supposed to get a particular job with a certain amount of money, and that like somebody is supposed to like you, and that you're supposed to get married and stuff, and then you're supposed to and your parents are supposed to be happy, and your boss is supposed to be happy with you. If you started making these assumptions, and when these assumptions were actually tested and actually turned out not to be working the way that you thought they would, then in that case you get overwhelmed. If you assume that life was going to be like a piece of cake and stuff like that, okay, well that was another assumption that may not have been reality, right? May not have been capital T truth. So this is what happens. We assume so many different things sometimes without even thinking that we actually start taking them as capital T truths in our rubric, that we get overwhelmed when things don't happen the way they do, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us actual capital T truths, but they're not as many as the assumptions that we make, right? There are a few. There are many capital T truths, yes. However, the assumptions that we attach to them to make our working or our daily processes easier, it makes it a lot. Yeah, the comment is the cartoon is so funny for me despite the serious conversation. Okay, yeah. So I hope this is making sense, that to function, to be able to not become stalled. To not become paralyzed because of all this analysis we might have to do if there was millions of possibilities. For us to function, we actually tend to limit things a little bit. We say, okay, you know what, I think I'm gonna assume that things are gonna happen this way, and I'm gonna go like this and stuff, and I'm gonna plan according to that assumption, right? It makes it a lot easier. For example, if you thought that, so that yesterday there was a forecast of egg-sized hail falling in the triangle area, right? And they said it's very dangerous for you to go outside and so on and stuff like that, right? Imagine an egg, like a hail, like frozen ice, in the or like ice, right? In the size of an egg is falling, from the sky, and many of them are falling instead, right? So if you assumed that this is a very likely scenario, you would probably just go inside and not come out. But if you thought, okay, well, it's a rare chance and stuff, and I'm going to assume it's not going to happen in my area, then you're going to navigate around that, right? But if you sat there and say, okay, well, it could happen at this time, it could also happen at this time, pretty much the things that we know, the questions that we were doing, that we were looking into, or we kind of asking in terms of what could be happening with that picture with the woods, the man or the person in the woods and stuff, and there was darkness and stuff, right? In that picture, if we sat there and tried to figure out all the possibilities, and then we tried to come up with a game plan for every single possibility when it comes to whether or not hail is going to fall in the size of an egg, in our area and stuff, and what's going to happen to our car, what's going to happen to us, what's going to happen to our house, what's going to happen, what kind of dents is it going to leave everywhere and stuff. If we sat there and tried to do all that stuff, we would become overwhelmed. So we have to make certain assumptions to simplify the process. Now, we should also, when we're making these assumptions, keep in mind that some of these assumptions may not actually be valid. Some of these assumptions may need to be adjusted later on, and that I need to put a note for myself, a note to self, right? That this is an assumption. So when things don't go according to this assumption, be comfortable with that, because you came in with with this understanding that this is an assumption and it could be wrong, right? And so when things don't go that way, you're like, oh yeah, of course, because I assumed it, and I knew that this was a possible thing, that my assumption could be wrong. That makes it a lot easier for you not to get frustrated and overwhelmed and stressed out. I hope this is making sense, and I hope you're kind of getting the idea of what I'm trying to get at. So with this, I'm going to go here really quick. So what is the hypothesis? Well, let's say the hypothesis is an assumption that's made functional, for lack of a better explanation. I'm just going to say it like that. A possibility, right, that I'm trying to make functional. In other words, I think that guy in the picture was a person who was, I don't know if I still have that open. Yeah, I have it open. So this guy right here, I'm gonna assume this guy is a person that's just like, trying to help somebody. It's a rescuer trying to look for a missing person, and that light is actually coming from his head lamp. The lamp that he has on his head, there's like a strap that, and then has a little lamp. So it's coming from that, and he's just looking for something, and that, he's actually trying to help and stuff. So I can go to him, and he's not like a random person. He's a person who's a rescuer and stuff. So I can go to him, and I feel safe and stuff, right? I make that assumption. My heart is not going to start pounding as much anymore, because I'd be like, okay, well, maybe it's just like, that guy, right? Notice what I did over here. I put in my rubric this idea that this person is a rescuer. And when I convinced myself, or when I accepted that rule, that this is a rescuer and he's not going to hurt me, then it made it a little bit easier for me to actually approach him and say, hey, like this, like, what's going on? Are you looking for somebody? Are you looking for something? Can I help you and stuff like that? That dynamic is going to happen. Your heart is not going to start pumping like, oh man, this person is like a scary person. This is jinn, for example, or like, this is a jinni or something like that. Maybe this is like whatever, or maybe this is like, a psychopath or whatever. You're not going to think like that, because if you think like that, your heart is going to start pounding. Your body is going to respond to the rules that you have in your rubric. Whatever rubric that whatever rules that you put in your rubric, are going to impact how you react to those situations, right? Now you go up to that person, he turns out to be a rescuer, and you're like, oh great, that's what I thought and stuff. Now if you go up to the person, he turns out to be a serial killer and stuff, right? That's going to be terrifying to you, right? But in this case, you should have been ready that, okay, yeah, there is a possibility he could be a serial killer as well, right? So I should be a little bit more cautious, but I shouldn't be as scared and stuff. But then maybe I should just have like a game plan in terms of like some protection or whatever and stuff. So if it turns out to be a serial killer and stuff like that, then I already have 911 in my speed dial and stuff, and I have my finger pressed and stuff, and I just press the call button and stuff, and then 911 will pretty much like know that okay, there's a serial killer that's out to hunt me or something like that, or like just whatever, right? So this is something to keep in mind, that if we just sat there, we wouldn't be able to do anything if we had all these possibilities. So instead, we narrow it down to one possibility that can help us navigate this context a lot easier. We can control with this the way that we approach this, the way our body reacts to this situation, by implanting in our rubric a particular possibility of what this could be, and then planning according to that. Just letting ourselves say, no, this is what it seems like, but being ready, being open to the idea that maybe our possibility, our assumption may not have been correct. Okay, so a hypothesis is just a possibility functionalized. I think that this is happening, like this person is here because he's a rescuer, and he's just looking for something or somebody, and maybe I can help him. Right? So like my functional statement here would be that I think the person is here because there's a missing person, and he's looking for that missing person, and that's that, right? So now this is a testable hypothesis, because I can test this, and I can test this possibility by going up to the person and saying, hey, what's going on? Like, are you looking for somebody, and something like that. So you can actually make it functional. So I'm trying to, help you understand how scientists work. They look at, for example, the cow, and they'll come up with a testable hypothesis. Maybe this is like, this is a cow that is a new breed. So how can I test if this is a new breed, or if it's not a new breed, right? I can actually test it. So I need to have my hypothesis needs to be phrased in a way that I can test that statement. I can test it. If it's a statement that I cannot test, for example, I don't know, like if it's an untestable hypothesis, maybe somebody can like message something in the chat about what an untestable hypothesis could be, right? So in the meantime, I'll think of something. But if you guys have some idea of like what a statement that you cannot test, it's not something that you can prove right or wrong. It could be a claim. They just mention that in the chat. But I hope you understand what I mean by testable versus not testable, right? So if it's testable, then if it's some possibility that I phrase in a way that I can test it, then I can go from there, and that is something that we can consider a hypothesis, right? And if I tried the hypothesis and multiple people tried to explore this hypothesis over and over again, and they tried different variations of this and stuff, and it seems to be more or less working out in that way. Then this is what we can call a theory. And this is where it's like, pretty much like this possibility has been explored many times by many people, and so far it really hasn't had much of a much of something that disproves it. It doesn't mean that this is actually law, but it means that this possibility has been tested so many times in so many different ways that people are sort of assuming that this is possibly how things are working, right? So that theory, like for example, the theory of evolution, for example, right? So there is data that's been there. So it's like, bits and pieces of, data here and there, puzzle pieces. And so far, whatever they're saying seems to have, it's not complete agreement, obviously, but there are certain pieces of that theory that seem to be making sense and stuff, that there might have been some sort of progression or something like that. But does it actually tell you the capital T truth? No, because there are still things that have not yet been tested. And there are still so many different possibilities and so many different aspects of this theory that haven't actually been tested. So maybe like, they've done, let's say, 1,000 trials or something, right? And so far it looks like, okay, well, it's not been able to be proven wrong, because the 5 pieces or like the 100 pieces of data that we've gotten, right, out of the potential thousands of data points, right? Let's say we got like, 10 or 20 or maybe like a 10,000, points or whatever, but there might be like a million data points out there. So these data points can be connected in a certain way. Now I showed you a picture of the universe, and I said that here, this one, and I said, if you imagine like I have this data point, and I have this circle right here, data point, and I have this green data point here. So these are the 3 data points, right? So based on this, I have a possibility of how these could have come here and stuff, what they look like, what their relationship with each other is, and that's it. Now, I can try this the possibility that this is a triangle many times over, but there's still so many other data points that are still not yet explored or identified that I cannot make a 100% definitive claim that this is exactly how this is, right? Likewise, when it comes to the question of does God exist, if we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists outside of the creation, that he is separate from the creation, then in that case, how in the world are we if we already assumed that there is nothing outside of the universe, then how are we gonna then go back and say, well, you know what? Allah doesn't exist. I'm assuming that. I don't have any proof for that. I haven't actually gone and actually, done experiments and explored how Allah could exist. If I say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have existed, but he's invisible, let's say he exists, but he is invisible to us, right? That means that I need to come up with a method of testing the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like actually going there and trying to figure out how I'm going to capture the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as evidence or whatever, or like his existence, assuming that he's invisible, meaning I can't see him, right? So what do I do instead if I can't see him? What other ways can I measure or detect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being there? Another thing, for example, would be if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if we assume that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always he's always ahead of his creation, in the sense that every time the creation tries to test and figure out where he is and stuff, or who, whatever, then he goes to a different place, for example. Let's assume that was a possibility. So there's always this try to catch him, but he's always ahead of us, and he's escaping our detection and stuff, right? And that's an active process where he's going through, right? So in this case, no matter what we try to do, we're always gonna miss him. So we need to come up with a methodology or a way to measure. So we need to come up with a process to be able to nonetheless detect him, even though he's escaping us, right? So I need to address that possibility as well. But if I haven't yet actually come up with all the possibilities of how God could exist, and I haven't actually been able to come up with ways to measure the existence of God in each of those possible ways, then I cannot make a claim that God doesn't exist. So if an atheist does that, it's not because of science. It's not because of, it's not definitive claim. Those are claims that can easily poke holes in and stuff, right? So I hope that, you're getting what I'm trying to get at over here, right? And this applies to many things. So functional is very important over here. And the idea of how do we test Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence, right? I need to come up with a claim. I need to come up with a possibility. And then I need to be able to frame it in a way that I can test it. And then I need to be able to test it. And then based on the data that I get, I need to be able to adjust my hypothesis. And so it's like a test, trial and error, back and forth and stuff, right? And the more assumptions I put in, right, to limit the number of possibilities, the the potentially farther away I could be from the capital T truths that I'm trying to explore and trying to identify. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, really quickly, on this note right here, these are some of the sources that we use for learning information to, try to know things, right? But each of these can have limitations. For example, authority, like for example, if you take somebody as an authority, like for example, CDC, when it comes to like the COVID-19 pandemic, right? It is good to have authority on the people that actually know their information and stuff, that are experts and stuff. But we need to also keep in mind that some of those people, or many of these people, may actually have limitations, right? If we had reached the pinnacle of all human knowledge that could ever exist, then that would be the end of it, right? But the fact that we're always learning and exploring new things, and people are always researching, and new information is being found and so on, it tells us that okay, this does have a limitation, that it's not a know-all everything, unless it is a being like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who knows everything, right? But in our context, instead, when the source of information is limited because that person has not learned everything that exists, for example, all the details about how everything works and stuff, and there's a lot of information that we don't know about, like how exactly does gravity work, right? There are theories about it. They're still trying to prove those possibilities and stuff. They haven't been able to confirm definitively if those things, whatever they're running with right now, is actually true. So we haven't been able to figure out the gravity, the concept of gravity to all its extents and stuff. So in this case, even if the person is talking about gravity, we need to understand that there are limitations in that person's knowledge and stuff, right? So authority is something you need to keep in mind, that authority does work, but it has limitations unless you're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who by default, by definition, is the one who knows everything and stuff, right? And then you have tradition, like customs and stuff like that you just kind of you go. It could be like culture and things like that, right? You could be borrowing ideas from somebody and stuff, right? You could be having so you can look at somebody who is displaying certain characteristics, or they're embodying certain things, and that could be coming from them. You can be copying, parents and kids, when the kids follow them, when the parents are praying, for example, they're praying, and they start mimicking them and stuff. That's the one thing. Another thing could be, for example, you have mentors and role models and stuff like that you look up to. Some of them could be like the Sahaba, the Prophet ﷺ, other the Sahabiyat and stuff, and others and stuff, right? And then logical reasoning, you could think about, okay, what if you can have logic that could be utilized over here to get knowledge and stuff. So there could be you can deduce something, right? You can infer something. You can say, for example, because it's seeming, because the clouds are because the sky is clear today, it doesn't look like it's going to rain today. So that could be a logical conclusion based on this if then statement or whatever, or some rules that you had in mind when it comes to logical reasoning. Then you have the scientific approaches, where we're talking about the hypothesis and stuff, and testing that hypothesis and going back and editing your hypothesis, and then using a new hypothesis, the edited version, to carry out another experiment, and kind of going in this cycle. That's the scientific approach. Intuition, I think that this should, based on my my intuition, or I think that this is how it should be, maybe your gut feeling or something like that, right? Or maybe it's an educated guess, for example. So you have something that you're using, maybe a line of best fit or whatever, to project what could happen. Trial and error, we talked about that. Experience, maybe you had past, and this is more like the trial and error. This is more like the data points and stuff and projecting like that, right? And then authority, we talked about that. So these are some of the things that we look at. Now, I want to pause over here so we can go and pray Maghrib, because I just saw the time. But inshallah, after that, I have 2 short videos. This one is a little bit longer, and I think this one is a 5-minute video and stuff, right? This is maybe 12 minutes. So we have about 15, 20 more minutes, and then just for the videos, and then we'll be done, inshallah. So I just have the videos after this. But I hope that this kind of gave you sort of an idea of how to move forward when it comes to knowledge, and how we overwhelm ourselves by adding too many assumptions as capital T truths, where in fact they're not capital T truths, they're just lowercase t truths, and how we can actually go back and edit our rubric, and maybe even edit our memories and stuff, as a consequence, or as an extended aspect of editing our rubrics and stuff, inshallah, so we can actually become content and happy and satisfied and more relieved and not overwhelmed and stressed and burnt out and so on. So I'm going to pause over here. Let's go ahead and pray, and whenever you guys get back, just text in the chat or raise your hand or whatever, and then we'll go from there, inshallah. So I'm going to pause the recording as well here, and we'll come back in a little bit, inshallah. Okay, so we're back, and let's do this video really quick. It is not a 32-second video. Okay, here we go. 5 minutes, yeah.
What do an ancient Greek philosopher and a 19th century Quaker have in common with Nobel Prize-winning scientists? Although they are separated over 2,400 years of history, each of them contributed to answering the eternal question, what is stuff made of? It was around 440 BCE that Democritus first proposed that everything in the world was made up of tiny particles surrounded by empty space. And he even
Now notice this over here. This is back in that time. They looked at something like we looked at that picture, right? And they try to make sense of it. The kind of questions that we were asking. This is what he was asking. Well, what is everything made out of? Like, can I go deeper into that? Can I break things into deeper, smaller particles and stuff, right?
Speculated that they vary in size and shape, depending on the substance they compose. He called these particles atomos, Greek for indivisible. His ideas were opposed by the more popular philosophers of his day. Aristotle, for instance, disagreed completely.
Now notice this is Aristotle, right? Or not him, but I'm just saying this is a group of people that are opposing him because they're mocking him because they don't understand, because they've already made certain assumptions about things. So you might come across a time where you actually are standing on something that's right. You have capital T truth, like the Prophets ﷺ, when they would come and they would be mocked by their people, they were actually standing on capital T truth that actually gave them contentment, because that capital T truth was exactly how life works, and they actually submitted to that. So they actually found contentment because their hearts resonated, their lives resonated with the reality. So there was no mismatch and stuff. They pretty much expected whatever was going to happen and stuff, and they navigate that and they were open to it and stuff, and that's that. So they were never so it was a lot easier for them to navigate that context. Whereas if you make certain assumptions otherwise, then things can get complicated and stuff. So I hope this makes sense over here, that just because many people disagree with you doesn't necessarily mean that what you're doing is wrong. Although, you should explore what you're doing. But in this case, notice how it's going on over here, right? Keep that in mind over here. So people will come with a lot of assumptions, and they're going to say that you're wrong, you don't know anything and stuff, you're not an expert in this, we are experts, whatever. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not necessarily true. So keep that in mind.
Stating instead that matter was made of 4 elements: earth, wind, water, and fire.
Now, this is actually, it's interesting because I know somebody, it's a therapist, and he actually believes in some of these kinds of things and stuff. And it's crazy because there's no actual proof of how this works, of the elements and the personality that's a certain way, for example. But they assume this and they go with this as if it's fact, right? And they almost project that on you, you have to be one of these categories that they think that is capital T truth realities and stuff. So by the way, if you remember, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but magic, when people do, magicians actually use these 4 elements as part of their magic process. So if you've ever seen what's the show called, The Airbender, I think, or something like that, they talk about the 4 elements and stuff. This is the context, this is where all that stuff happens and stuff. So we don't really believe that. They actually, the Avatar. So they talk about wind, water, fire, and air. So in Islam we have our way of doing things a little bit. So these things are actually used in those contexts and stuff. So keep that in mind.
And most later scientists followed suit.
Yeah.
Atoms would remain all but forgotten until 1808, when a Quaker teacher named John Dalton sought.
Now, look at this. Almost 2,000 years pass, and they still think that it's earth, metal, fire, and whatever the 4. Yeah, so all those 4 elements, right? They think that this is how things are working. 2,000 years, people are actually holding on to a possibility, assuming that possibility is capital T truth, when in fact that capital T reality, the capital T reality of that thing is actually assumed not to be the case. In other words, they're holding on to a possibility that is not capital T truth, and they're actually projecting it as it is. So everyone else is looked down on, no, this is not true, and so on. And you notice that in many other things that we went over, we saw a TED talk on IQ tests and things like that. So keep that in mind, that if you understand what is capital T truth and what's not, And if you understand where knowledge is actually coming from, you can easily understand how to navigate these contexts when people are trying to project confidence or whatever when they actually are standing on nothing.
To challenge Aristotelian theory. Whereas Democritus's atomism had been purely theoretical, Dalton showed that common substances always broke down into the same elements in the same proportions. He concluded that the various compounds were combinations of atoms of different elements, each of a particular size and mass, that could neither be created nor destroyed. Though he received many honors for his work, as a Quaker, Dalton lived modestly until the end of his days. Atomic theory was now accepted by the scientific community, but the next major advancement would not come until nearly a century later, with the physicist J.J. Thompson's 1897 discovery of the electron. In what we might call the chocolate chip cookie model of the atom, he showed atoms as uniformly packed spheres of positive matter, filled with negatively charged electrons. Thompson won a Nobel Prize in 1906 for his electron discovery, but his model of the atom didn't stick around long. This was because he happened to have some pretty smart students, including a certain Ernest Rutherford, who would become known as the father of the nuclear age. While studying the effects of X-rays on gases, Rutherford decided to investigate atoms more closely by shooting small, positively charged alpha particles at a sheet of gold foil. Under Thompson's model, the atom's thinly dispersed positive charge would not be enough to deflect the particles in any one place. The effect would have been like a bunch of tennis balls punching through a thin paper screen.
I'm going to speed this up because the objective of this video is not what they're going into now. I just wanted you to kind of see like the actual the beginning portion. So,
but while most of the particles did pass through, some bounced right back, suggesting that the foil was more like a thick net with a very large mesh. Rutherford concluded that atoms consisted largely of empty space with just a few electrons, while most of the mass was concentrated in the center, which he termed the nucleus. The alpha particles passed through the gaps, but bounced back from the dense, positively charged nucleus. But the atomic theory wasn't complete just yet. In 1913, another of Thompson's students by the name of Niels Bohr expanded on Rutherford's nuclear model. Drawing on earlier work by Max Planck and Albert Einstein, he stipulated that electrons orbit the nucleus at fixed energies and distances.
Now notice they're trying to build up from previous ones. So they have a hypothesis, one of them didn't work. They tried another one. They tried experimenting different things back and forth. And then as they came up with more information, then another person built off of that possibility. And this is how knowledge is pretty much building up, right? So a lot of things that we take for granted are actually like processes that took a long time, and some of them might still have a lot of assumptions, may not be actually facts and stuff.
Able to jump from one level to another, but not to exist in the space between. Bohr's planetary model took center stage, but soon it too encountered some complications. Experiments had shown that rather than simply being discrete particles, electrons simultaneously behaved like waves, not being confined to a particular point in space. And in formulating his famous uncertainty principle, Werner Heisenberg showed it was impossible to determine both the exact position and speed of electrons as they moved around an atom. The idea that electrons cannot be pinpointed, but exist within a range of possible locations, gave rise to the current quantum model of the atom, a fascinating theory with a whole new set of complexities whose implications have yet to be fully grasped. Even though our understanding of atoms keeps changing, the basic fact—
Notice he said his implications are yet to be grasped. So there's a lot that we don't know, but sometimes people come off like they know everything and stuff, but they don't.
Of atoms remains. So let's celebrate the triumph of atomic theory with some fireworks. As the electrons circling an atom shift between energy levels, they absorb or release energy in the form of specific wavelengths of light, resulting in all the marvelous colors we see. And we can imagine Democritus watching from somewhere, satisfied that over 2 millennia later, he turned out to have been right all along.
So he came out, he came out to be right all along, pretty much, right? That's the idea. Okay. Now the next one is this one, and inside this is the last one, and then we're done. That was a quick video, yes. So I don't want to use the word pseudo-intellectuals, like as a blanket statement. What I want to do is to say, yes, there are people who are pseudo-intellectuals, and there are people who actually, so there are people who actually go beyond what actually is known by human beings, and they try to make, they kind of come up with like their own additional assumptions or, theories and stuff like that, and they project it as facts. So they have like little pieces of information. Let's assume like these little dots are pieces of information, but the connection that they're making are, often their own and stuff, right? And it's not something that's confirmed then there's no necessarily consensus on that particular topic as they might make it seem. So keep in mind that, people are human beings. I mean, like scientists are human beings, and they have their own, ideas and biases and stuff. So they might add that here and there. When you're reading scientific papers, you might notice some of those things as well. They might actually go a little bit beyond what the science actually showed or what the experiment actually showed, and they might actually have certain assumptions that they made during the process itself that might actually have caused issues with the actual study. And then there's also the idea that political and social other factors and stuff that come in that influence things. Like, for example, if the industry is actually, and we talked about this last time, the industry is funding something, then in that case it might actually be biased, and it might not actually have the right results and stuff. It might have twisting, it might have missing data and stuff like that. Just just keep that in mind. Okay.
Is that my aura?
Now she mentioned, is that my aura? Now, like, this is actually referring to something that is again an hypothesis, and it's not confirmed and stuff and all that, right? It is something that people believe that every human being, some people believe that every human being has an aura, and that you could test an aura, and that if, different personality types have different aura colors and stuff, and like all these different things and stuff, right? So that obviously doesn't have like actual like scientific data and stuff.
Over the past 10 years, I've been researching the way people organize and visualize information. And I've noticed an interesting shift. For a long period of time, we believed in a natural ranking order in the world around us, also known as the great chain of being, or scala natura in Latin. A top-down structure that normally starts with God at the very top, followed by angels, noblemen, common people, animals, and so on. This idea was actually based on Aristotle's ontology, which classified all things known to man in a set of opposing categories like the ones you see behind me. But over time, interestingly enough, this concept adopted the branching schema of a tree in what became known as the Porphyrian tree, also considered to be the oldest tree of knowledge. The branching scheme of the tree was in fact such a powerful metaphor for conveying information that it became over time an important communication tool to map a variety of systems of knowledge. We can see trees being used to map morality with its popular tree of virtues and tree of vices, as you can see here with these beautiful illustrations from medieval Europe. We can see trees being used to map consanguinity, the various blood ties between people. We can also see trees being used to map genealogy, perhaps the most famous archetype of the tree diagram. I think many of you in the audience have probably seen family trees. Many of you probably even have your own family trees drawn in such a way. We can see trees even mapping systems of law, the various decrees and rulings of kings and rulers. And finally, of course, also a very popular scientific metaphor, we can see trees being used to map all species known to man. And trees ultimately became such a powerful visual metaphor because in many ways, it really embodied this human desire for order, for balance, for unity, for symmetry.
Okay, I'm going to pause the video here, and I'm going to actually stop today's session here, inshallah. But I want you to look at these words over here that they mentioned. How many of these things are you experiencing in your own life, because of which potentially you might actually become overwhelmed? What I mean is, for example, if you want everything to be in a certain order, you're trying to make sure things work out in a particular way, for example, then how does that impact your stress level, right? And how, when you're evaluating your own process, this is the discipline that we talked about here, right here, right? When you're evaluating your own process, how is it that you're noticing that maybe what are some things that you're trying to control where you don't have control over, right? Maybe you're trying to control things that you don't have control over. Maybe you're trying to control things that may not have as much control, wherein you may not have as much control as you think you should have, or that you have, or that you think that you have, right? But maybe you have only a tiny bit of a portion of it and stuff, right? I want you to start thinking about all of those things in the context of understanding how knowledge works, how assumptions work, how our lives become complicated when we try to do things a certain way, and things like that. Okay, so they mentioned, for example, he mentioned about how knowledge is sort of framed in the form of trees, or kind of like organized in the form of trees and stuff, right? So think about that. Think about, like, when you look at a chart like that, what is your assumption? Do you think that there are experts that are sitting there and they actually have confirmed every little piece of that information that's contained in that diagram or that hierarchy of things, for example, or in whatever the presentation style might be, do you feel like some experts must have confirmed this 100% and it's 100% guaranteed, and then you take it like that because you consider and assume authority behind whoever made that thing? Or do you say, wait a minute, okay, is this actually just like what people think? Is this a map of what people think how things work, or is it a map of how things actually work? Is it a lowercase c truth, or is it a capital T truth, right? Or is it a mixture of both? And what is that level of mixture? Is it predominantly capital T truth or some capital T truth, right? So start thinking about that. Start thinking about how you approach new concepts, new things, and we'll go from there, inshallah, next time around, inshallah. But I just wanted to give you sort of like a starting point. So when you deal with situations, when you deal with things like, for example, mental health, when you deal with things like frustration, burnouts and stuff, when you deal with like anything in life and stuff, right? How do you navigate that? Do you operate on a bunch of assumptions, or do you operate on whatever capital T truths that you know for a fact 100%, like it's guaranteed, nobody can poke a hole in it, and then you keep yourself open to any of the possibilities that come beyond that, or do you do something else? What do you guys do? So start exploring that. Start being mindful of how you're operating every day in every action that you do. Okay, so this is the homework for next time, inshallah. Or from now and onwards, actually, this until the angel of death comes. Keep this in mind, but like just kind of be more mindful of everything that you do. How am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Like, do I have proof on this? Do I not have proof? Am I making an assumption? If I'm making an assumption, am I open to the other possibilities that are beyond the assumption, right? Or am I sort of like becoming really rigid in like, no, this assumption must be true and stuff, and that's how it is and stuff? Am I projecting onto reality, onto the entire universe, or like, the world around me, whatever I think the world should be like, right? Or am I actually submitting to the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually created the world? Right? What am I doing? Right? Being mindful of that is very, very important, because that's what determines whether you become frustrated, overwhelmed, stressed out, depressed, whatever, oftentimes, as opposed to something else. Now, I am not making claims of like what causes depression in every situation and anxiety in every situation, and all these mental health conditions in every situation. What I'm saying is that from an Islamic perspective, we actually have more information, and we have more confirmation than the other systems of knowledge and stuff like that people are sort of like referencing and stuff like that. We have more guarantees, we have more clarity, and so on. And that helps us actually navigate more effectively and cut to the chase, essentially, instead of having to do trial and error, and impact the lives of people potentially for the next centuries, or whatever, and realize later on that what we were thinking and doing, whatever, was actually incorrect information. Imagine in the context of mental health, if Democritus, the guy that we were looking at, if he had proposed an idea of how atoms work and stuff, right? And everyone else in his context was saying something completely different. That's completely like debunked nowadays and stuff, right? But if this is what he was saying, and for 2 centuries, for 2,000 years, 2 millennia, that something else was actually something else was actually being utilized, right? And then two millennia later, 2,000 years later, we actually say, oh wait, you know what? He was right all along. So imagine 2,000 years of human history, 2,000 years of impact of this information or this assumption. Imagine if that was in the context of mental health. For if how many people would go through all the suffering and pain and stuff because we were rigid in terms of how we were navigating things and stuff, right? Slavery and the things that are happening, that happened, in that context, right? If we continue having certain assumptions about how things work, about how people are and stuff, then how does that impact people? The IQ tests, when they were used, and then like certain laws were passed and stuff like that to say, for example, it's okay to sterilize women, for example, in Virginia, and things like that, right? That kind of stuff actually impacted people, and it hurt people. It messed up people's lives and stuff, right? Slavery as an institution, like and like the people, the players behind it, the stakeholders and stuff, right? If you think about it, how much negative impact that happened in that, in that context. You can see how much it's still continuing to impact people today. Black Lives Matter was a big thing, last year, but after some time and stuff, what real changes actually took place, since the big revolutions or the big protests all over the world, right? What kind of real big, sudden changes or whatever, material substantial changes that took place after that happened, right? Is this something that's going to still take a long time for people to actually make a difference, right? Or are we going to continue hurting people and stuff, right? So that's the kind of stuff that I want you to start thinking about. Sometimes we don't, we just sort of go with the flow, whatever people are saying and stuff. So then in that case, we're like people who said that there's 4 elements or 4 subcomponents of everything that exists: water, earth, fire, and like air and stuff, right? So if that's what we do, then there's a lot of people we're hurting in the process while we're projecting confidence in what we're doing. And then 2,000 years later, we're going to be like, oh wait, we made a big mistake and stuff, and oh my god, we hurt so many people and stuff, right? So just some things to think about, inshallah. Yeah, we have sudden tragedies, not sudden changes in response, unfortunately. Yeah. Just making progress. Yeah, the George Floyd thing is making some progress. Yeah, I think they had a settlement or something like that recently. So that's true. But that's I think part of that is also because of the fact that it was such a big case and like everyone was talking about it. And then in certain cases, I think it also may have been used as a political tool for certain people to do certain things. I'm not saying it's all. There are people. I am saying that there are some good people that are really trying to make a difference. But I think sometimes it can also be used in another way and stuff. So just understanding how politics works, how socio-political factors work and stuff, and there's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of things that happen here and there and stuff, right? So understanding that helps you navigate things more effectively. And then instead of getting frustrated and overwhelmed or kind of like feeling like, man, why is this not happening, or why is this like this or whatever, you actually start feeling more content. You're like, okay, well, this is what's happening, and things start making more sense and stuff if you kind of let yourself open to the ideas or the possibilities and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, so there is some progress, and these are like the comments in the chat. Yeah, there is some progress in that arena, but again, because it was a worldwide thing and stuff, it's something that should have taken. One person might assume, for example, that because it was a worldwide phenomenon, it should have been a radical, sudden change in the system and stuff, right? But this is not how things work. And so if you understand why there are obstacles and stuff and what those obstacles are and stuff and how do we address them, it makes it a lot easier for us to kind of account for them when we're planning and the expectations that we need to have when we're dealing with situations like this and stuff, right? So keep that in mind. People can become very rigid and stuff. They can become very stubborn on things that actually are not really capital T truth, and then they actually come off, they project themselves as having all this understanding and everything. So just keep that in mind. Start looking into this. Start, wherever you look, whatever you listen to, whatever. Even for example, in khatras and khutbas and stuff like that, there might be some assumptions that are being made and stuff, right? Because ultimately, people are the one. They're presenting information. They're making assumptions of what the audience might need to hear, want to hear. Maybe they don't know all the nuances, all the details of people's lives and stuff, all the different aspects and stuff, but they might still be talking about certain things and stuff. Some of the stuff might be useful, some of them may not be useful. So I want you to be able to kind of just look at information and be able to say, okay, well, what can I extract from this that might actually be capital T truth, and how do I verify capital T truth? And what are things in here that might be assumptions that might be relevant in a particular context where those assumptions are valid, and what are those contexts where these assumptions may not be valid, and so this information may not be appropriate or relevant and stuff, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause over here, inshallah, and I want you guys to go back and again, explore this concept a little bit. I did intentionally put this over here, I wonder, because I want you to start becoming curious, and I want you to kind of push your boundaries a little bit, erase some of the boundaries that you kind of drew around yourselves and stuff, get yourselves out of those proverbial boxes and stuff, right? Think outside a little bit. So I hope this was useful in kind of starting or sparking that interest in you guys, inshallah, and inshallah we'll continue next time with more of this, inshallah. So with that, I'm gonna stop here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا.